of the ghosts by laying out food for them to eat, and lighting lamps to guide them on their dark road from and to the grave. Herodotus, who briefly describes the festival, omits to mention its date, but we can determine it with some probability from other sources. Thus Plutarch tells us that Osiris was murdered on the 17th of the month Athyr, and that the Egyptians accordingly observed mournful rites for 4 days from the 17th of Athyr. Now, in the Alexandrian calendar, which Plutarch used, these 4 days corresponded to the 13th, 14th, 15th, and 16th of November, and this date answers exactly to the other indications given by Plutarch, who says that at the time of the festival the Nile was sinking, the north winds dying away, the nights lengthening, and the leaves falling from the trees. During these 4 days, a gilt cow swathed in a black pall was exhibited as an image of Isis. This, no doubt, was the image mentioned by Herodotus in his account of the festival. On the 19th day of the month the people went down to the sea, the priests carrying a shrine which contained a golden casket. Into this casket they poured fresh water, and thereupon the spectators raised a shout that Osiris was found. After that they took some vegetable mold, moistened it with water, mixed it with precious spices and incense, and moulded the paste into a small moon-shaped image, which was then robed and ornamented. Thus it appears that the purpose of the ceremonies described by Plutarch was to represent dramatically, first, the search for the dead body of Osiris, and second, its joyful discovery, followed by the resurrection of the dead god, who came to life again in the new image of vegetable mold and spices. Lactantius tells us how, on these occasions, the priests, with their shaven bodies, beat their breasts and lamented, imitating the sorrowful search of Isis for her lost son Osiris, and how afterwards their sorrow was turned to joy when the jackal-headed god Anubis, or rather a mummer in his stead, produced a small boy, the living representative of the god who was lost and was found. Thus Lactantius regarded Osiris as the son instead of the husband of Isis, and he makes no mention of the image of vegetable mold. It is probable that the boy who figured in the sacred drama played the part not of Osiris but of his son Horus, but as the death and resurrection of the god were celebrated in many cities of Egypt, it is also possible that in some places the part of the god come to life was played by a living actor instead of by an image. Another Christian writer describes how the Egyptians, with shorn heads, annually lamented over a buried idol of Osiris, smiting their breasts, slashing their shoulders, ripping open their old wounds, until, after several days of mourning, they professed to find the mangled remains of the god, at which they rejoiced. However the details of the ceremony may have varied in different places, the pretence of finding the god's body, and probably of restoring it to life, was a great event in the festal year of the Egyptians. The shouts of joy which greeted it are described or alluded to by many ancient writers. The funeral rites of Osiris, as they were observed at his great festival in the 16 provinces of Egypt, are described in a long inscription of the Ptolemaic period, which is engraved on the walls of the god's temple at Dendera, the Tentyra of the Greeks, a town of Upper Egypt situated on the western bank of the Nile, about 40 miles north of Thebes. Unfortunately, while the information thus furnished is remarkably full and minute on many points, the arrangement adopted in the inscription is so confused, and the expression often so obscure, that a clear and consistent account of the ceremonies as a whole can hardly be extracted from it. Moreover, we learn from the document that the ceremonies varied somewhat in the several cities, the ritual of Abydos, for example, differing from that of Busiris. Without attempting to trace all the particularities of local usage, I shall briefly indicate what seem to have been the leading features of the festival, so far as these can be ascertained with tolerable certainty. The rites lasted 18 days, from the 12th to the 30th of the month Khoiak, and set forth the nature of Osiris in his triple aspect as dead, dismembered, and finally reconstituted by the union of his scattered limbs. In the first of these aspects he was called Khent Ament, Khent Amenti; in the second step Osiris Sep; and in the third Sokari, Seker. Small images of the god were moulded of sand or vegetable earth and corn, to which incense was sometimes added. His face was painted yellow and his cheekbones green. These images were cast in a mould of pure gold, which represented the god in the form of a mummy, with the white crown of Egypt on his head. The festival opened on the 12th day of Khoiak with a ceremony of ploughing and sowing. 2 black cows were yoked to the plough, which was made of tamarisk wood, while the share was of black copper. A boy scattered the seed. One end of the field was sown with barley, the other with spelt, and the middle with flax. During the operation the chief celebrant recited the ritual chapter of the Sowing of the Fields. At Busiris, on the 20th of Khoiak, sand and barley were put in the god's garden, which appears to have been a sort of large flower pot. This was done in the presence of the cow goddess Shinti, represented seemingly by the image of a cow made of gilt sycamore wood with a headless human image in its inside. Then fresh inundation water was poured out of a golden vase over both the goddess and the garden, and the barley was allowed to grow, as the emblem of the resurrection of the god after his burial in the earth. For the growth of the garden is the growth of the divine substance. On the 22nd of Khoiak, at the 8th hour, the images of Osiris, attended by 34 images of deities, performed a mysterious voyage in 34 tiny boats made of papyrus, which were illuminated by 365 lights. On the 24th of Khoiak, after sunset, the effigy of Osiris in a coffin of mulberry wood was laid in the grave, and at the 9th hour of the night the effigy which had been made and deposited the year before was removed and placed upon boughs of sycamore. Lastly, on the 30th day of Khoiak, they repaired to the Holy Sepulchre, a subterranean chamber over which appears to have grown a clump of persea trees. Entering the vault by the western door, they laid the coffined effigy of the dead god reverently on a bed of sand in the chamber. So they left him to his rest and departed from the sepulchre by the eastern door. Thus ended the ceremonies in the month of Khoiak. In the foregoing account of the festival, drawn from the great inscription of Dendera, the burial of Osiris figures prominently, while his resurrection is implied rather than expressed. This defect of the document, however, is amply compensated by a remarkable series of bas reliefs which accompany and illustrate the inscription. These exhibit, in a series of scenes, the dead god lying swathed as a mummy on his bier, then gradually raising himself up higher and higher, until at last he has entirely quitted the bier and is seen erect between the guardian wings of the faithful Isis, who stands behind him, while a male figure holds up before his eyes the crux ansata, the Egyptian symbol of life. The resurrection of the god could hardly be portrayed more graphically. Even more instructive, however, is another representation of the same event in a chamber dedicated to Osiris in the great temple of Isis at Philae. Here we see the dead body of Osiris with stalks of corn springing from it, while a priest waters the stalks from a pitcher which he holds in his hand. The accompanying inscription sets forth that this is the form of him whom one may not name, Osiris of the mysteries, who springs from the returning waters. Taken together, the picture and the words seem to leave no doubt that Osiris was here conceived and represented as a personification of the corn which springs from the fields after they have been fertilized by the inundation. This, according to the inscription, was the kernel of the mysteries, the innermost secret revealed to the initiated. So, in the rites of Demeter at Eleusis, a reaped ear of corn was exhibited to the worshippers as the central mystery of their religion. We can now fully understand why at the great festival of sowing in the month of Khoiak the priests used to bury effigies of Osiris made of earth and corn. When these effigies were taken up again at the end of a year or of a shorter interval, the corn would be found to have sprouted from the body of Osiris, and this sprouting of the grain would be hailed as an omen, or rather